Let's get moving. Okay, welcome to CIS 2400, 11:05, November 2nd. I hope you guys are doing well and you're continuing to observe the social distance and stuff. I had another session this morning and I went through a number of items, so I will briefly share some of that information. I'm hoping to post the video after this session, so you'll see two videos, and the first one will have more detailed information about where we are and the progress that we are making. I also shared information about the assignments for this week and exactly how to go about working on them. But I'm going to revisit those just in case. So first thing is looking at the syllabus. I hope you can see that. So this is showing us where we are. And we are in week 11 or something like that. Time goes fast when you're having fun. That's what they say. So in week 11, we're looking at system development and project management. So in the first video, I went through the system development, and then this second video, I'll talk about project management. So, and a little bit about corporate responsibility. Next week, on Monday, we'll have a review of exam 2, and then from Wednesday to Saturday, you'll have exam 2 available, and you'll pick one day, pick 2 hours, and finish it. And after that, you'll be on your own. You can fly away. So that's where we are. The semester is almost over, and I hope you have at least learned something. Any questions so far? Okay, silence means no. Okay, so next item, we'll talk briefly about the assignment for this week. And we'll get this from the live modules. So before I talk about the assignment for this week, I'll talk about the assignment from last week. And we had the discussion board, which was on VoiceThread, talking about the CRM. Some of you did very well, and some of you are kind of like reading stuff. It's okay, but make sure that when you're reading, you don't appear like you're reading. So like if you watch the news, most of them are actually reading from a teleprompter, but they also make sure that you practice before so you can bring your points out clearly. So some of you seem like you're just Googling things off the internet and talking at the same time. So you want to make sure that you minimize that, because you might be doing interviews through the internet and you don't want to appear like you're reading stuff directly or answers when somebody's asking you the question. So it's always good to prepare ahead. You can refer to your notes, there's nothing wrong with that, but make sure that at least you're articulating your points much more clear. So the other assignment was on Microsoft Access, and some of you did well, some of you, I think you struggled a little bit, and the reason why maybe you struggled is because you're not creating time to review what has been shared, because I had shared a lot of information on this assignment on the internet. So I had 2 videos that I think I posted, and they were showing you how to go about doing the assignment. So this is the assignment. This is actually one of your students' assignment. So this is one of your colleagues. This is what I was expecting you to do. We had the Excel file, and from the Excel file, I was expecting you to recreate what you call the entities or the files. Now, there were a few questions that I said you can skip. One was talking about business rules. I said don't worry about that. Another one was on entity relationship diagram. I say skip that. Now, in previous video, I actually gave an example of what we mean by entity relationship diagram, whereby you see the relationship between the different tables. So we call that a relational database management system. The key here is relation. So it's a relationship. So what that means is that we have more than one table, then those tables are related. So they are linked. The way we link the tables is through what you call primary key and foreign key. We said a primary key is a field that is used to uniquely identify the record. So examples of primary key is the driver's license. That's an example of a primary key when you go to the DMV. Another example of a primary key is for a car. You can have the V number or you can have the registration of the car. For the student, you can have student ID. For employee, you can have employee ID. Those are some of the examples of primary keys. And a foreign key is a primary key that appears as another field in another table. And we use those two to create the relationship. So if you had created these tables right here, or what you're calling the entities, and the relationships, and the way I do that is I'll come here to database tool, and I'll click on the relationship, and I see those relationships like that. See? This is telling me we have, this is an entity, a table, which is called order. It has two fields, order ID and order date, and order ID is a primary key. You have that key right over there, and then you have order detail. It has two, so this is a composite key. And then you have product, category, and on like that. So these relationships is the one that establishes the connection between the different tables, and it satisfies that condition of the relational database management. There's another concept that's called normalization. We're not going through that now because this is not a database management class. Now, I mentioned in the previous video that I give you a lot of hints, especially with access, because I know some of you might never have taken an access class, and this is not a database design class. So if you had watched the previous video, you probably must have seen something like this. And I said, use that information, recreate the tables for me, populate them, and maybe generate one or two reports, and then that should be it. And I gave you an example of how to generate the report. You go to create, and then you can use the report wizard. So this is very straightforward. You click in here, select the table that you're going to be working with, and then you have the fields down here. You just click, move that to there. If you want another table, product, and you want to maybe have the product ID and maybe the product name, have that, and if that's all what you need, you can click finish, you can go to next, and then once finish that, you're going to be able to get a report right there. So you have a report like that one here. This is a very simple report that I just created. Okay, so you can see it's showing me the category ID and the items that are in that category. So if you had these tables like that, okay, and with some data in them, and then you had one or two reports, you got ready. And those are things that I think you should have been able to create based on the instruction that I provided. Any questions so far? Okay, so I'm gonna increase the volume. Sure, why it's low. Okay, is that much better? I never changed anything from previous class, so I'm not sure why the volume is not high enough. Anyway, also check your volume on your side. Make sure that there's nothing on your system. Okay, so we have that. So moving on. In the previous video, I shared information on the assignment for this week, but I'll briefly mention it because you're here and I want you to also benefit from that. So I'm going to maximize that and then I'll share it. So give me 1 second and it's up here, share that. Okay, so this is the assignment for this week and there's a template for you and it's talking about the business requirement. We'll revisit this. I mentioned about what is business requirement in the previous video, and we have 8 questions that you're going to be working with. So the template is already provided for you. And all what you do is you read the question here. So this is one of the requirements. So we mentioned about the business rules. Now we're looking at them more specifically here. Anytime that you're designing a system, there are going to be some requirements that you want the system to satisfy. Okay, so one of the requirements is that in this database that we are creating, we want to make sure that all employees must have a unique employee ID. So that's the requirement. Sometimes somebody will give you the requirements and those requirements are going to have some problems or they are going to satisfy some conditions or not satisfy some conditions. So in our example here, we are given these requirements here and we asked whether if you're designing a database, this is a good requirement. And we say this is a good requirement. So if there is an issue, you write yes. If there's no issue, you write no. So I gave you some examples, and then I tell you why this requirement does not have some issues. And I come down here and I say the system must track employees' hours worked based on employee's last name. And I say this one has an issue. Now, can somebody tell me why we are saying that if you have a database and we are using the employee's last name to track how many hours they have worked, we might have a problem with that database? Somebody want to explain to me why that is? Anybody?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, can you see the question on the board of the system?
The second one that says the system must track employees' hours work based on employees' last name.
Yes. If you have a system that was doing that, will that cause a problem in the system?
Yes.
Why?
Okay, let me see. Because there could be multiple employees with the same last name.
Very good. So that is the issue. So exactly what you told me is what you explain right here. And then how can you fix that? How can you fix that issue? How can you track employees' hours worked? If you're not using their last name, what can you use? What is unique to every employee? Somebody else or the same person? Don't overthink, because that's what you do. You overthink. You already have the answer. And if you're looking on the item, you actually can see the answer right there. That's with the employee.
Yes, there would be an issue because some people can't work a minimum of 8 hours a week.
No. We're still on number 2.
Oh, okay.
So you told me there is an issue because you can have employees who have the same last name. That's correct. So how can you correct that issue? You have to tell me how can you correct that issue, because that's what you're going to be doing. You identify the problem and then you tell me how you're going to resolve that issue. So how can we resolve that problem?
You can set up a system that does maybe first and last name.
Can you have people who have the same last name and first name?
No, I
Yes,
would
you
never
can.
know it.
Yes, you can. Just go internet and Google for Mary Jane and tell me how many Mary Janes you're going to find.
But at the same job,
Yeah, how big is the company? So what is one thing that you can use that is unique to every employee? Look at the first question and tell me whether you can get the answer from there.
employee ID.
Exactly. So that's one of the way that you can resolve that issue. Instead of using the last name, use what?
Can you say that again?
So you told me about employee ID. So how do we use the employee ID to resolve the issue we have in question 2?
You can track employee hours based off their employee ID.
Okay, that's good. That's all you needed to do. So you'll use that concept as you move down and answer the other questions. So that's how you go about doing this. So use that template and identify if the problem is there. Some of them you're given answers, others you don't. So here, say if there's a problem, what is the issue, and then how do you resolve that issue? So that is the part of that. So the other part is on the discussion, and we are not using voice thread this week. You're just doing regular straight discussion, and it's talking about business requirement. So just go ahead and tell me about some of the issues that we had with business requirements. So in the previous video, I talked about some of the issues. I mentioned something about the language. I mentioned something about if you observe people, sometimes some people, when they're being observed, they tend to act differently. I also mentioned about language, so that can be an issue. So pick any of those and go ahead and tell me and share a few of those. So that is on the part of the week 9. on the discussion. So we are using the regular discussion where you just type the information. Why is gathering business requirements a challenge for most of the businesses? So, and then make sure you comment on at least one of colleagues' video. In the previous video, I talked a little bit about people submitting their assignments on time. And I said that goes to the heart of time management and also respect. So if you wait until Sunday, 9, 10 p.m. and you send me an email asking for an extension, uh, most of the time you might not get that because we have a schedule that you're working with, and I've always encouraged you to try to do your work a little bit earlier. So plan ahead, because the reason why I have the assignments due by Sunday instead of Saturday is that you have a little bit more time, and also I have set my time when I want to grade and move on. So if I have to give you an extension, like I mentioned before, you're asking me to give myself more time, and I need a really good justification as to why I should be giving you more time, because I'm giving myself more work. Because I have to go back and re-enable the assignment, and then I have to grade and then not share the report with the class and wait, and there's too many things that you have to go through. When you're giving excuses, I'm not saying that people are not giving proper excuses, but if you go on the internet and you Google the grandmother excuse, it's like the most commonly used excuse by students. I don't know, it's because some of them maybe they assume their grandmother is already gone, so even if they say something about her, it's not going to have an impact. I don't know. But that's like the most common given excuse, the grandmother excuse. So just be careful what you're doing, because when you start working, it's not everybody who's going to accept your excuses. And all what I've said is, if you work with your professors, they'll work with you. I've given you my phone number. You have the email. You have the discussion board. Reach out. If you have issues in assignment and you're asking your colleagues and they can't resolve the issue, reach out to your professors. Don't wait until the last minute to do that. Okay? So if you're sending email late at night, sometimes it'll be lucky, sometimes it's not going to work out. But also it shows a little bit of respect. Okay, so any questions so far before we get into the course material?
No questions.
Okay, so chapter 9, and the previous chapter, I think I covered the first part that's talking about the system development life cycle. Yeah, so this system development life cycle, I covered that, how you develop the system and the steps that you have to go through. So in this second part, I'm going to cover project management. We talk about, we stopped here, responding to dilemmas. And so quick question. So how many people are here online? 3 of us. So everybody will take one of these questions and tell me what you'll do. So the first question is, you are so responding to dilemmas. So this is on the development, so ethics and security. Many times on a project manager's judgment about what is right or wrong is called into question. Within limits of reason, always try to provide early visibility of issues and risk and provide mitigation plans. And this is something you should be doing for your assignments. Know what the assignments are, what is required before you start working on them. If you look at the assignment earlier on, you'll be able to know whether you're going to have issues, and then you can start making arrangements to contact your professor. So things do not go away just by ignoring them. Project managers must act with integrity and professionalism, ethically and responsibly. These are things that cannot be overemphasized. How would you respond to each problem below? So there are 3 questions here, and I think we have 2 or 3 people here. So pick one. First one is, you are aware that the project you are managing has gone to red status due to a 10% schedule slippage. So this means that you're working on a project, and this project was supposed to take 6 months, and you realize like it's going to take maybe 8 months or something like that. So do you alert the stakeholders or wait to see if you can get back on track? What do you do? That's the first question. A member of the executive team asks you to hide the fact that one of the business requirements collected is inaccurate, cost $200,000 fix. So the executive believe it is the customer's fault as they signed off on the business requirements. What would you do in this case? And the last one is you have several employees that are pulling their weight on the project, leaving early and missing deadlines. This happens all the time. One employee will be fired if you notify the human resource of these problems. What would you do? So anybody pick one question and tell me what would you do in any of these scenarios?
The first one, I kind of feel like you should tell the stakeholders just because it's in a red status, and if they don't, if the team can't get it back on track, then they can go farther into like the red status.
Very good. So there is a process actually that is used for making changes to a project. It's called change management, and it's always important that you inform the stakeholders if there is any change in the duration, in time, in the cost of the project. And we'll be talking about what we call the three-book constraint, three important things in a project, which is the duration of the project, which is the schedule, the cost of the project, which is how much money we are going to take, and the scope, which is what is it that we are doing on this project. So anytime there is a change in that, you have to involve the stakeholders. So very good. Somebody else? The other question? Who else is here? Was that Denisha who answered the question?
Yes.
Okay, T, are you there? Probably not. Okay, you want to give another one a crack?
I can.
Go ahead.
Okay, for the last one, I feel like they should tell HR because people aren't helping and they're leaving early and they're missing deadlines.
Exactly.
Even though somebody will get fired, they still should notify HR.
Okay, very good. So remember we said something about integrity, professionalism, ethically, and responsibly. Okay, so if you are not informing the human resource, then you're not following these guidelines over here. And the same thing with question number 2. You should let whoever needs to be informed about this problem here. It's not the customer's problem, because if you did not do a good requirements collecting, which happens all the time, okay? People fail to do business requirements. And basically what we mean is that either you don't interview people exhaustively to get all the information that you need on how you're going to be designing the system. And we've seen this happen all the time. So you should always go back and let the customers know, because you don't want to wait until it's too late, because you're going to be making changes to the project and that can cost you a lot. So very good. So this is another methodology that's used for what's called the agile, which I mentioned before. So we'll continue from the piece on project management. And where is that? Okay, so this piece here, 9.2. So the learning outcomes for this, there's actually a course. I don't know whether, have you taken that class? Project management? Anybody? Okay, so some of you maybe will, maybe you will. It's a whole semester course that you take. I think it's 2620, and it's all about project management. So here we explain, identify the primary reasons that projects fail, identify the primary project planning diagrams, and then identify the 3 types of outsourcing along with their benefits and challenges. Okay, so this is very common nowadays. When you're working on projects, we do what's called outsourcing, or just the sourcing, because we have different formats of sourcing. So this explains about why we need to do some planning. Explain project management and identify the primary reasons projects fail. So there's a lot of research out there. If you just Google failure in project management or reasons why projects fail, you'll find very, very many articles talking about this. Okay? So there are many reasons why we do that. And some of the reasons because people overschedule the resources. And by overscheduling, this would mean that you either put too many people or too few people in a project. Okay, so anytime that now you're reading any information or any article on management information system, you should be able to make the connections or build the relationship. And I mentioned that in the previous video. So let's read a little bit of this to see exactly what they're talking about. So no one think of building an office complex by turning loose 100 construction teams to build 100 rooms with no single blueprint or agreed upon vision of the completed structure. So that's the plan. You need to have a this is precisely the situation in which many large organizations find themselves when managing information technology projects or IT projects. Organizations routinely overschedule their resources, they develop redundant projects, it happens all the time, and damage profitability by investing in non-strategic efforts. You know how to compute profitability, but now you should know how that is done. And then when you talk about non-strategic, what you need to know here is the strategic, so which comes from the word strategy. And this is how a company is able to achieve its objectives. So strategy. And so by investing in non-strategic efforts that do not contribute to the organization's bottom line. So business leaders face a rapidly moving and unforgiving global marketplace. We mentioned about the world being a flat world. So you're not only competing with companies in here, you're competing with companies all over the world. Most of the companies have global supply chain. Okay, Nike, they get their products made in foreign countries. They sell them here, they have to ship them back and forth, get raw materials from other places. So you have to do that. And some of this you're saying is unforgiving global marketplaces that will force them to use every possible tool to sustain competitiveness. Project management is one of those tools. Okay, so we're saying that if you are using project management tools, that can give you a competitive advantages. Okay? So for this reason, business personnel must anticipate being involved in some form of project management during their career. So you are going to be working in projects. And most of the companies, when you're working, the way they're structured is even if it's a job that you're working on, is contributing in one way or another to a project the company is working on. So that's why we are talking about project management in this class, in this section, in our last chapter. So these are different examples of some of the types of projects that you can get involved in the organization. You can be working in the sales department, and they are working on deploying new service to help upsell a current product. Now you're heading towards what is that? Black Friday, Thanksgiving, shopping spree, Christmas. So companies are coming up with different sales campaign. Okay, and we'll see that marketing, creating a new TV or radio show. Anytime that you're watching TV, you see a lot of commercials. Now you've been seeing a lot of political campaign ads. That's part of what you're calling marketing. Those are projects. People have been working on those. In finance, requesting a new report summarizing revenue across the departments. That can be a project that you're going to be working on. Most of the companies do that because you need to have a financial report at the end of the year or 6 months or whatever financial period the company is working on, accounting and even MIS. So depending on which department you're working on. So this seems like a company that is organized hierarchically, department or by function, will be involved in any of these types of projects. So we have a concept of what we call tangible from the word touch. So this is something that you can touch. So these benefits. So when you work on a project, there are going to be some benefits from that project. And some of these benefits are going to be tangible, easy to quantify and typically measured. So you can measure it. Intangible, on the other hand, you cannot measure them. And they give some very good examples here. Tangible, decreased expenses. You can measure how you're decreasing the expenses in the organization. If you are moving from manual checkout register to an automated checkout register, you can tell when you're using the manual register how much you're paying the employees and their benefits and the sick days and all that. When you automate that process, you can compute the cost and you can tell the difference. Number of processing errors, decreased response time, all that. These are things that are quantifiable. You can compute them, you can write the numbers. Others are not. Improved decision making. How fast are you able to make a decision? You cannot measure that. Improve community what? Service. You cannot put a value to that. Improved goodwill. Okay? Improved morale in the organization. You cannot measure that, although it's a benefit that actually impacts the bottom line. So that's an example of what you're calling the tangible and intangible benefits. Any question?
No.
Okay, before you invest in a project, you have to make sure that you carry out some studies to see whether that project actually has some value. So that's what you call feasibility studies. So it's kind of like looking around in the market, and then you do a little bit of research and see whether the project is actually something that can benefit the organization. So you go through this type of what you're calling the studies. You have the economic from the word economy. So measures the cost effectiveness of a project. What value is this project going to bring to the organization? Or you can look at the operational. Okay, how is it going to help us improve our operations? Okay, same thing with schedule, technical, political, and even legal. So legal feasibility measures how well a solution can be implemented within existing legal and what contractual what obligations. Okay? There are going to be some times, like for instance, we had to shift from face-to-face to what online classes. So the schools had to actually come up with what a study to see whether that when we shift from online to from face-to-face to online, whether students have to get some refund or whether that was still in the world well represented in the contract that the students have with the school. So that's part of what you're calling legal feasibility. And then you have others that are politically, so you're doing something, a project on the environment, is that going to be politically accepted? So that's some of the things that you have to do when you're working on the projects. And then you're missing business. So with today's volatile economic environment, many businesses are being forced to do more with less. That happens. Okay. So businesses are trying to cost. Businesses today must respond quickly to a rapidly changing business environment by continuously innovating in goods and services. So innovation is key to making sure that you remain competitive. And project management can help you to do that. Okay, so developing projects within budget and on time is challenging, and with the help of solid project management skills, managers can avoid the primary reasons projects fail. So these are some of the reasons why the projects fail. And like I said, if you go on the internet, you'll find very many examples of why businesses fail. Okay, so one is unclear or missing business requirements. So somebody is working on a project and he's not very clear what this project should be doing. Skipped phases when people are trying to jump hoops. Okay, so this also happens with students. When you're working on an assignment, you need to exactly understand what is required of the assignment before you start working on it. Initially, what happens when people start working on assignments and then they end up making a mistake and then they don't finish the project or the assignment on time. So these are some of the examples. Changing technology. You can start working on a project when you have an idea about what you want to do, and if the project's taking maybe a year, 6 months in, technology changes. You have to go back and either change the cost and things like that. The cost of finding errors in the system development lifecycle. So most of the people will be testing the project before it's finished. And usually what you want to do is based on this chart here, you want to make sure that you find as many errors as possible during the planning, the analysis, and the design phase. Because if you find errors in this time over here, it's going to cost you less. You see, this is the cost, this is the phases. So if you find any mistakes in your project during the planning, analysis, and design, it's going to cost you to fix the error. If you find the error in the implementation or even in the maintenance, it's going to cost you a lot. And we have seen this especially with recall. So anytime that you see a company which is recalling product, it means that there is something that they did not find during these phases. Okay. Now they have to incur all those huge costs. It's very expensive to fix a problem during the maintenance or during the implementation phase. So you want to make sure that you're doing that early on. The other concept I'll talk about is what's called the triple constraint. If you have taken a project management course or you've learned anything about project management, you will hear about this triangle here. Okay, so it has three sides. One represents the time, one represents the scope, and the other one represents the schedule, or what they are calling the resources. Cost or the resources, okay, or the budget. So this is what's called the triple constraint, because when you're working on a project, you are trying to maintain a balance between these three things. Time is how long is this project going to take? How much is it going to cost? And what exactly does this project involve? Okay? If you change the time, you have to change this or this. Okay? So if a project is supposed to take 6 months and you say it's going to be taking maybe 4 months, Okay, so you're shortening this here. So what that means is you have to increase the resources. Either you have to bring in more people to work on the project, or you have to take out some of the requirements in the project. Okay, so you're balancing that. And the same thing, if you increase what's supposed to be done on the project, you have to increase the time to do it and also increase the what? The resources to accomplish that. So the triple constraint is a very important concept in project management, and that explains by the way that you go about doing that. So there is this concept which is by the PMI, Project Management Institute, which is one of the leading bodies in managing projects in the world. And they came up with this concept of what's called project management, a body of knowledge. And they have some elements that define some of the things that you need to do properly in a project for your project to be successful. So they say you need to have a communication plan. How are you going to be communicating with people who are working on the project? Executive sponsor, the personal group who provides the financial resources for the project. Usually you want, if you're the project manager, you want this to be somebody who is senior in the organization. If you remember the example of the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, when that project had a problem, you were able to fix that problem within a very short time because the executive sponsor was somebody who was very influential, President Barack Obama. Project assumption, factors considered to be true, real, or certain. So you need to have that. So hours in a work week or time of year the work will be performed, and on like that. So these are some of the concepts that you need to be familiar with, make sure that your project is going to be successful. We have a number of diagrams that you can use to help you in identifying your project. So project planning is the process of a detailed planning that generates answers to common operational questions. That is, why are we doing this project, or what the project will be accomplished for the business. Some of the key questions project planning can answer include. So this is going to be kind of like general, but depending on what kind of project you're going to be working on, you can tailor them to that project. For instance, how are deliverables being produced? So if you're making a campaign, a political advertisement, or a commercial for a drug that you want to be running on video, you need to know that if it's on TV, you need to have some words, some pictures. If there's no TV, then you need to make sure that the voice is very clear if it's going to be done on radio. What activities or tasks need to be accomplished to produce the deliverables? So political campaign like you have seen now, do we need to have the person who is running for office there? Maybe, maybe not. Okay. So do we need to show people who look like they are real? Okay, if you're talking about healthcare, okay, what exactly do we represent in healthcare so that can catch the attention of the people who is responsible for performing the task? Okay, so we need to get people who are going to be in there, and then we have to record them, and we have to do the cutting, visuals, and on like that. So those are what you're calling the requirements for that. So this is another concept that you will see a lot, the criteria for successful objective creation. Anytime that you're working on an objective, you have to make sure that it follows this concept. It's called the SMART, which means it's very specific. So the objective has to be very specific. Who is this commercial going to be targeting? And I'm using the political ad. If you're in this region, you must see a lot of them. But they don't always target the same demographic. There are some that are going to be for military, some are targeting African Americans, some are targeting the elderly. So that's the concept of what being specific, because sometimes if you're trying to hit everybody, you end up missing everybody. Measurable. You have to make sure that how can you measure what you're doing? That objective must be measurable. How do we know that it's being effective? Agreed upon. You have to agree on what you're working on. Realistic. You have to make sure that your objective is realistic. It can be achieved. Okay. And then time frame. What is the time that you're going to be doing this? So do we want the commercial to be what? 30 seconds, 1 minute, and then you have to also make sure that you set the time within the period when you're going to be doing that. If you have a political campaign that you're running on November 8th or November 5th, that might not be very useful, because by that time, hopefully everybody will have voted and will be done with that. The same thing if you're planning on a commercial for Thanksgiving shopping period, you need to make sure that you do it before that period. So that's what we mean with this concept here. Okay, so a few examples here of time management application, what you can do to make sure that you're working on your project. Any questions so far?
No.
Okay, so this is some of the concepts or some of the tools that you'll encounter when you're working with project management, and I'll just briefly walk through them. So this is what you call the critical path example, and basically what you do is you have your project and then you break down your project into small manageable pieces, what's called the work breakdown structure, and then put this into the system like Microsoft Excel, and you use what is called the dependency or the logical relationship between the task, and through there you are able to see the relationship. So you can see the relationship between the different phases of the project. You can also use what's called the Gantt chart. So this shows you the activities, and you can see the major activities. So you have like, this is what you're doing in the planning, this is what you're doing in the analysis, this is what you're doing in the design, this is what you're doing in the development. You don't necessarily always have to follow this structure. You see here they're using Microsoft Project, but if you follow this structure, you're actually able to see how the project progresses. And this can actually show you when you're following it or when you're way ahead of your schedule or your resources. So this is a tool that you can use to help you manage your project. It's called Gantt chart, and you're using Microsoft Project to help you do that. Another word that you might be familiar with is what's called the scope creep, from the word combining the word scope and the creep. And this is the tendency to permit changes that exceed the project scope. So basically what's happening is you start working on a project, and then either you or the stakeholders come in and they start adding more items to the project. That's what's called the scope. And usually that's something that you should try to avoid if you're the project manager. Work breakdown structure is nothing else but is what you call a plan that shows all the different elements of the project. Okay, so this is an example. You have the project, and then you have different tasks, and then you break down those tasks into small manageable tasks. That's an example of work breakdown structure. Okay, right here we talk about a little bit about outsourcing, and we have insourcing. Okay, so you're using people within an organization. So usually what you find is most of the companies have like MIS department, and then they have accounting department. So the accounting department needs a system to help them manage the accounting and information system data. And what they do is they work with the MIS department to develop that system. So in that case, that company is doing what's called insourcing, because they're using professionals within the organization to do the work. Out is when you're using people who are outside the organization. And so these are some of the reasons why companies do that. So you want to use other companies out there so that you can concentrate on what's called the competencies. You want to concentrate on doing what you are good at. So, like for instance, Walmart, they want to sell products. They are a retail store. They don't want to be doing the shipping. So what do? They outsource the shipping to another company like UPS. And UPS is only involved in what? In shipping. They don't sell anything. So Walmart concentrates on their core competence, which is retail, and then UPS, they concentrate on their core competence, which is shipping. Okay, financial savings, also you end up saving, okay, because you have companies in maybe other parts of the world where it's cheaper for the labor for them to do programming and do that. You can save some money through that. It's a little bit more controversial in the US because of that, and we have seen cases of 60 Minutes and all that. So about foreign nationals being trained by Americans and they take their job and on like that. Growth and the globalization. So we talk about the concept of the world being flat. So we have companies in the US whereby they are using other companies in that part of the world to do the work because you can use technology to do that. Okay, so this is the example of the relation between locations of outsourcing and the customer control. So if you are onshore, if you're using somebody who is in the same location or the same vicinity, you as a customer, you have more control. If you're using somebody who is in China, you sometimes don't have that much control. And we have seen cases of intellectual property rights and on like that. Okay, so that gives you that, a little bit of work breakdown structure there. And this shows you the savings from the cost. So somebody working in China, they make $9,000 a year. Somebody working in the US, they make $9,000. So you can see there is a huge incentive for outsourcing for most of the companies. Okay, so these are some of the challenges that you can face with outsourcing, and something about the death match. concept there. You can read about that. And some examples of projects. So Mission Impossible. This is talking about projects that will give people satisfaction. There is something in project management that we call, actually in organizational behavior, that's called intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. So Mission Impossible, these are projects that you do because they drive you and you have intrinsic motivation. And then when you finish, you are so happy. Suicide, these are projects that are impossible to work on, and you should try to minimize that. So suicide project is a project has no chance of success and offers you nothing but pain. This is the equivalent of your worst nightmare. So avoid this kind of project. Now, sometimes you don't choose this project, okay? But if you're given one, just do what you have to do. Okay, any questions? Okay, if there are no questions, I'm going to stop this recording.